Is that better? Oh, okay. There we go. Verses 1 and 2. So it says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith, let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily trips us up, and let us run with endurance the race that God has set before us. We do this by keeping our eyes on Jesus, the champion who initiates and perfects our faith." So let's go back. It says, therefore. Therefore what? Therefore, since chapter 11, right? Therefore, since everything we went over last week. Remember, we went over the things that faith does, those three things, right? Do you remember them? Therefore, since faith anticipates that the promises of Christ will come true. Therefore, since faith works, it moves, it does not sit still. Therefore, since faith perseveres, right? It may stumble, but it keeps on going. Therefore, the writer says, since we are surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses, what's the next two words? What's he use? Come on, guys. Let us, right? He says, let us. So here's what just happened. The writer is referring back to all those names in chapter 11. He says there was Abel, there was Enoch, there was Noah, there was Abraham, there was Moses, there was David, and he gives this long lineage of faith, and then he stops and he turns and he says, now it's your turn. Now it's your turn. That you and I are here by the blood and faith of the generations that came before us. Now it's your turn, he's saying. So let me, let the whole Christian faith run our race now. You see, he includes us in this wonderful group of people in chapter 11, and then he turns and he says, it's your turn. Since they are crying out from the grave, he's saying, it's your turn to run your race. These men ran, they ran well. These women ran, they ran well. And he's saying, now, it's your turn. That sounds really loud up here. Is it loud? He's saying it's your turn, right? Remember last week we read all of those names. All of those names of some of our brothers and sisters in Christ. Remember, some of them were thrown in prison. They were tortured. They were sawn in half. Can you imagine being sawn in half? They were thrown into the arena and mauled by wild animals. Some of them went around with sheepskin on them. You know what that means? Does anybody know what that means? Okay, the way they would have fun with Christians was they would skin an animal, and of course it had blood all over it. Then they would tie it to a Christian and let them loose. And then the wild animals would just maul them to death. That's how the Romans had fun with Christians. They would set them on fire. And so the writer of Hebrews is saying they are crying out from the grave for us to run our race, that they ran theirs. Now it's our turn to run ours. How many of you have had loved ones go on to be with the Lord who ran their race well? All of us, right? Do you understand they're crying out from the grave for you to run your race? They're crying out from the grave for you to run your race well. So how do we run our race? Look what it says. It says, let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily trips us up. Now let me tell you why that's so significant. This is really, really important. The writer is saying, the text is saying there are things that can slow you down that are not innately sinful. And the reason I know this is because the writer here separates them, okay? He differentiates between these two things. He says there are things that can slow you down that are not morally sinful, and then he says there's just that blatant sin, right? Do you see it here? Yeah. And so what that means is there can be things in your life and in my life that are cumbersome to God's fullness in our life that we don't even call sinful, right? And then he says, of course, there's just that pesky sin. And I guarantee you, for everyone in this room, because this is an older crowd, what keeps us from running our race well is not the second part here, the blatant sin, but it's the first part. Us filling our lives with things that we don't call sinful that slow us down, right? Now, if this was a very young crowd, I would say it would be the second part. But I think most of us has gotten past those youthful, lustful sins, right? We've kind of dealt with them, although there are things that I still struggle with, that I've struggled with for a long time. But I would say for most of us, it's not blatant sin that slows us down. It's just things that we fill our life with that slow us down, that keep us from running our race well. You know, I don't think that I'm going to see Andy on the street corner selling crack cocaine, right? I don't think that's going to happen. But I guarantee you, every single one of us in this room have filled our lives with things that we don't call sinful that keep us from running our race well. And here's one thing that I don't understand. Can I be honest with you? Seriously? Just totally honest. Here's what I don't understand. And I'm not saying this from some high moral perch looking down on everyone morally, because Lord knows every one of you in this room is a much better person than I am. I have no illusions about who I am. Seriously. I know how sinful I am. So this is not coming from there, but here's what I don't get. Do you truly understand what you've been offered? You see, every single one of us has been offered God. Do you get that? We haven't been offered a religion. We haven't been offered a philosophy. We haven't been offered an ideology. We haven't been offered someone to help us out with our lives. We haven't been offered membership into a church. We've been offered God himself. Do you get that? And do you understand how totally unworthy you and I are of that? I know we like to think of ourselves as good people, but we're not. I mean, we're really not. And the Bible, from start to finish, wants you to know that. I mean, it uses some nasty language so that you understand how filthy you are. It says, as a dog returns to its vomit, so we return to our sin. So who's the dog returning to its vomit? We are. Also, the Bible says that the best that we could ever do, the best that you can ever be and the best that I can ever be, now don't get mad at me, this is the Bible, are but filthy menstrual rags to God. That's the exact language that it uses. And so the Bible wants you to know how unworthy you are of him, and yet this God who spoke everything into existence wants you, and he wants me. It's the most amazing thing in the world. I mean, it really is. And yet, there are so many of us, so many who profess Christ, and here's what I don't get, who are just trying to run their race enough to get into heaven, but they're still wanting to live their lives. I don't get it. I mean, I really don't get that. Do you? And the only reason for that is someone believing that Jesus is not enough. Right? I mean, we're missing out on so much. And I'm not talking about prosperity or anything like that. My goodness, look at the Apostle Paul. He was the richest man in the world. But his life was full of pain and suffering, right? So I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about missing out on God. There's so many of us just trying to do enough to get in. And for most of us, it's we're filling our lives with things that we don't call sinful that are slowing us down, right? That's what I want to talk about. I don't want to talk about the second part of what the writer says here about blatant sin. I want to talk about just a few things, 3 things out of hundreds or thousands that we could talk about that are not morally sinful that slow us down. And what I mean are things that keep us, that take up too much of our time from Jesus and his bride, the church, okay? That's what I mean. And before I get to these, let me just say this. none of this is going to make any sense whatsoever. It's not going to make any sense if what you're after is not Jesus. You understand what I'm saying? If you want Jesus in the world and in your life, this is not going to make any sense at all. It's just not. Okay? In fact, it may be insulting to you. Okay? But if what you're after is Jesus, and that's what you want more than anything in this life, these things may get you to think. Okay? Just 3 things. Number 1, relationships. Relationships can slow you down. Okay, here's what I mean by that. For you young people who are in here or maybe listening, or even for you older people who want to get married, spend your life with that special someone, listen, and are serious about Jesus, I have to add that. Don't even think about dating anyone who is not serious about Jesus. Okay? Now, they can say they've been saved and baptized, but that doesn't mean anything. You can see it in their lives, okay? Don't even think about dating anyone who's not serious about Jesus, because it's not going to work. It's just not going to work. Here's what you do. You find someone who is running after Jesus as fast as they can. You grab a hold of that person and you run with them. That will be a marriage. I mean, that will be a wonderful marriage. It won't be perfect. There are no perfect marriages, right? You know, Jennifer and I, we've been married 30 years. The only reason it works is because we're both running after Jesus together. She loves Jesus more than she loves me. I love Jesus more than I love her. That's the way it's supposed to be. But don't even consider dating anyone who doesn't love Jesus. I used to marry a lot of people. I haven't married anyone in a long time, but there for a while, I married a lot of young people. And if they wanted me to marry them still to this day, especially young people, I'd have to take them through 3 or 4 weeks of premarital counseling. Okay? If they just come to me and say, we're getting married tomorrow, can you do it? I say, no, that's not going to work. So I take them through premarital counseling, and I can always tell if it was going to work. The marriage, that is. Because there was always one person who was serious about the Lord, and it was always the woman. Always the woman. And it's usually the guy who's like, yeah, Jesus, yeah, I guess I love him. I was saved and baptized when I was 12 years old. You know, he'd go through that. And I would always tell him whether I thought it was going to work. There was this young girl, 21 years old. Boy, she loved Jesus. Man, you could just tell. It was so genuine. She loved Jesus so much. She loved this boy who was 22 or 23. He was a decent boy. They could have had the American dream. They both had good jobs. I mean, they could have lived the American dream. You know, nice house, nice cars, vacation, stuff like that. But I sat down and I talked to her. And I said, you really need to consider whether you want to marry this boy. And she knew what I was talking about. And she said, do you think I can change him? And I said, no, you can't change anybody. I said, the Lord may change him, but do you want to take that chance? And I looked at her and I said, here's what's going to happen. You're either going to get a divorce or worse. And I said worse. He's going to take the flame that you have for Jesus and it's going to become a flicker. And I told her, nothing's worth your flame. I don't care how much you love this boy, nothing is worth that, right? Another one with regards to relationships, and this may sound strange, but your kids can slow you down. I mean, they really can. If you love your children more than you love Jesus, they can slow you down. They really can. The way the order is supposed to work is Jesus, your spouse, your children, maybe your parents, you know, somebody, and then the church. That's the way it's supposed to work. That's the right order. For you to be the best parent you can be, your children need to know that you love Jesus more than you love them. And they not only need to hear it, they need to see it in your life. People will always forget what you say, but they'll never forget what you do, right? I mean, they won't. You parents, your children needs to see that Jesus is the most important thing. There was a kind of a bombshell study that was done by the Pew organization, and it came out in April. You may have heard of it. It was in all the major newspapers and all the big news stations, and it showed that church membership was down, right? Did you hear about that? That's not the bombshell. The bombshell is how drastically that happened, how fast that happened. And most experts believe, even Christian experts believe, that that's not going to change, okay? There are many reasons for that. The biggest reason, I believe, is because parents have not demonstrated to their children over the generations that church is important. They just haven't. Some of you who are older, my goodness, you remember when you were little, right? You were going to church, weren't you? I mean, you were going to church. There wasn't no doubt on Sunday morning. There wasn't no saying, well, are we going to go to church today? There was none of that. You were going to church. And so the reason church membership is down is because parents haven't demonstrated to their children that church is vital. One more with regards to relationship. You need to be picky about your friends, right? I mean, you really do. I'm not saying don't hang around with your family or things like that. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying shun these people. But what I'm saying is you need to surround yourself with people who love Jesus so that when your life falls apart, and it will, it's coming, they can be there to support you, right? Unbelievers, unbelieving friends, they can't lift you up that way. They will always, misery loves company. You've heard that, right? And that's true. That's true. But with Christian friends, my goodness, we can be there to support one another, cry with one another, laugh with one another, rebuke one another. My goodness, I want people in my life who see what's going on in my life and say, Don, don't go there. I see this. You don't need to go there. This is not glorifying God, and it's not going to turn out well for you. Those are the friends that you need in your life, right? So that's number one, relationships. Number two is work. Work. Now, I understand we all have to work, right? I mean, we do. We all have to work to make ends meet. I get that, but if your work is interfering, taking too much of your time away from Jesus and his bride, the church, you need to think about that. You need to come up with a plan. Maybe you need to think about a job switch or talk to your employer, right? Now, I've said that to people, and the first thing they said to me, and my employer ain't going to say, they're not going to let me go to church. They will. A lot of times they will. Jennifer's worked at Lowe's for, 33 years? Is that right, honey? 32. Okay. For a long time, they wanted her to work on the weekends, right? And so she went in and she talked to her employer, and what she does is she gets the money out, she puts them in the registers. It's very important. They can't start anything without Jennifer doing her part, okay? What she told them is, I will come in at 5:30 in the morning, I will get all this done, and I want to go to church, and then I will come back and finish up. They let her do that. But you know how hard that is? I mean, that's an exhausting day. She did that for many, many years. But we got to understand that that's how important church is to her. And it should be important to us, right? It really should be important to us. And what I have found most of the time, as far as especially here in America, most of the time the reason we're working ourselves to death is not to make ends meet, but to get all these luxuries, right? Seriously. And there's nothing wrong with that. But we got to be honest about them, right? Here's the thing. Everything you own and I own is one day going to be in a yard sale or a garbage dump or it's going to be burned up, right? Jesus said, store up treasure in heaven, not on earth. I guess what I'm saying is there is absolutely nothing that this world offers us compared to our relationship with Jesus, right? So work is another. Last one, and this is going to sound crazy, happiness, right? Happiness, trying to find happiness can slow you down. You know what I mean by that? Trying to find happiness can slow you down. The fact of the matter is, everyone is searching for happiness, absolutely everyone. And the reason we're searching for happiness is because when we were born, there was something missing in us. Okay? There was something missing in us. And that traces all the way back to Genesis chapter 3, right? So we're all born sinful. We're all born with a sin nature separated from God. That's what's missing. And everyone, whether they acknowledge it or not, they're searching for happiness. All you got to do is watch. I mean, shoot, here in America, the entertainment industry is the biggest industry we have, right? I mean, it really is. We spend billions and billions of dollars a year on entertainment, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's not. I like ball games. Shoot, this afternoon I'm going to watch a NASCAR race. I like those things. But here's the thing. There are a lot of people who are searching for happiness, and it's only temporarily. It's only temporary. What we have to understand that the only thing that can fill that hole, fill that void, is the one who created us. You see, we were made for God. We were made to be fulfilled by God in Him alone, and we were made to find our happiness in God alone. But there are so many people that are just searching for happiness when it's really almost an illusion, right? It's only temporary. So those are just three things out of hundreds or thousands that can slow us down. Now, here's the thing, and I'm going to finish. I know what people can say. And I warned you when I started this, right? I said, this ain't going to make any sense in what you're after unless what you're after is Jesus. Okay? But so here's what people can say. Well, my goodness, there's nothing wrong with, dating people. There's nothing wrong with, trying to find happiness. There's nothing wrong with these things. No, there's not. But that's not what we should be saying, right? Our starting point as Christians is not what can I do to get to heaven, right? That's not where we should start. Our starting point, what we should think about is how can I run my race the best way I can, right? Because I think where we got off the boat, especially here in America, is the first one. What can I do just to get into heaven and still live my life? That's wrong. Because remember, when you gave your life to Jesus, you completely forfeited your life. That's why Jesus kept telling people, count the cost before you follow me. He tried to talk people out of following him, right? He kept saying, no, no, no. Everybody said, no, I'll follow you. Jesus said, no, 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 no. You need to think about it because it's going to cost you your life. For every one of us in here who has given our lives to Jesus, it's not what can I do to get by. It's how can I run my race the best way that I can. And I guarantee you, there are things that are slowing us down. I mean, there are. There are things that are slowing me down. There are things that are slowing you down that you fill your life with. It's not up to me to tell you to get rid of them. It's up for you and God to look at those things, right? And so that's what I want you to do this week. Yeah, I'm sure you're saved. I'm sure you're going to heaven. But is that the goal? Is the goal to get to heaven? I thought the goal was God. to have a relationship with Him. If the goal is just to get to heaven, again, we're just going to do enough. We're just going to do enough. But if our goal is God, we examine everything in our lives to see if there is anything slowing us down. Amen? Pray with me.